Hello, I'm Kenny from Owlbot, and today I wanted to talk about the C100 Mark II and to discuss whether or not it's viable in 2020, which is a question I see asked a lot now, as if a camera will have come out 5 months ago and people will be like, is it still good in 2020? Is it still good in 2019? So to quickly answer that question, yes, it is still good in 2020. The reason I picked the C100 Mark II 5 years ago was that I needed a cinema camera. After doing all the research, I found that the Canon cameras matched the Alexa most easily. And this is actually the C500 sensor, just in a small body. And then it down-reses that sensor from 4K to 1080 and then saves it onto SD cards. So in my head, that was like, okay, I don't need 4K. One 128 gig SD card gives you 11 hours of footage, and there's 2 slots on this thing. So you can just have one of these in there and never think about it. You're not going to shoot for 11 fucking hours. Or you could run 2 cards for redundancy, just in case there's clip corruptions or whatever. And I've loved that always. The next thing I did was thinking about lenses. I went with the Sigma 18-35, which was highly recommended at the time. It still is. This lens has basically never left this camera body for the past 5 years. If you go on the Owlbot YouTube, pretty much everything there except like 2 videos were shot on this exact setup, this lens, this body in this cage. I picked the lens not only because it was recommended, but it went down to a 1.8 and it was super, super, super sharp. My thinking was if I could get a really clean image out of the camera, that would be perfect for most jobs. And if I needed to, zhuzh it up a bit, I could go with a filter or a vintage lens or whatever. But the filter idea kind of stuck with me, and everyone does that. Everyone's using a black pro mist or whatever. I've got a ton of different diffusion filters on here right now. There's a glimmer glass, but I got, glimmer glass, black pro mist, warm black pro mist, Ultracon, Digicon, satin. There's tons of different contrast filters. They all do something different. But, if you're looking for a more softer, warmer, dreamier, kind of sexier look, you go with the diffusion. If you're looking for something sharp and clean, you just don't use diffusion, shoot with the Sigma glass. I will try to get the image as bright as possible without clipping. And if I can't control the light, which happens more often than we'd like to admit, I will just make sure that the skin tones are at 70-ish%, 60 to 70%. So there's no false color in here, so I'll set the zebra to 70 and just make sure the highlights on the skin are zebra-ing and just let the rest of everything fall where it may. I can't control it. That way, when you get into post, you have enough data to play with, because what you're doing when you're filming, for certain clients, you're filming to hand it off and for it to just be used, and that's kind of tough. But really what we're doing when we're filming on digital cameras is we're trying to get a good data set, as it's called, for which to manipulate in post. We are not expecting the image that comes out of here to be done. Now, obviously, again, that's not always the case, but if you're shooting your own stuff or you're shooting for something creative, that often is the case. You're shooting log, for instance. The thing with sensors is, not unlike film, is they want more light. The shadow areas don't carry as much data as the brighter areas. So because it's an 8-bit image, you don't have a lot of flexibility in post when you're color grading, specifically with the gamma. The color can kind of move around, but the gamma really gets messy, or can get messy. So other things that are great about this camera, more than anything, built-in NDs. So you can still shoot at 1.8 or 2.8 outside. Built-in NDs, when you don't have them, you're so used to variables and swapping out NDs, and it takes time, and sometimes the quality of the ND isn't there. Having the built-in NDs is fantastic, and you don't get any IR pollution because it was built for the camera, and it only takes half a second, and you're there, and it changes your life. The other thing, when you have the top handle on, XLRs. If you need audio, it sucks to have a separate audio solution. You want to have it just built right into the footage, right? So having 2 XLRs in the top handle is great. Top handle's a little finicky, but if you don't need it, you just ditch it. If you do need it, leave it on. In terms of the build of the camera, as you can see, I've got it in a Red Rock Micro Ultra Cage. And I've got the handle secured to the side, and it's just secured by a peg, what they call the spud. And I used to have it on a rail. I had it all configured different ways, but I found this is the best because it's just bolted directly to the cage, so you get a real sturdy grip. So with the flip out monitor out, if that rests on your forearm, which feels like it shouldn't be sturdy, but for whatever reason it has been for the past handful of years, you've got your grip on this hand and your grip on this hand. This is an incredibly sturdy shooting position, and handheld looks really good like that. And another thing I'll do is I'll put a monopod in the top and rest that against my head, when I'm looking down, and that keeps it from rotating, so you get a very, very stable image shooting handheld, which is awesome. Another thing that's nice about the Ultra Cage is the power distribution block, so which also powers the follow focus that I use sometimes, the Red Rock follow focus. But this just makes it so that you can power this camera with a V-lock. I do have a barrel connector to DTAP, but there's no registration so that it can just fly out. And sometimes if it comes out just a little bit, it'll turn off the camera, which is super annoying. So instead, I run the power through the power block, and if the cable gets jerked, it doesn't yank it out of the camera. We're still rolling. It might move the camera, but it doesn't ruin it, and allows you to shoot with a 150 watt battery, you could probably shoot the whole day, no problem, just leaving the camera on. And like I said, the SD card shoots about 11 hours of footage, so the likelihood that you're going to run out of footage or battery is very low. Another thing I'll do is, and like I said, you got to nail white balance, but interestingly, what I've done for a long time now is I shoot everything at 43 or 4500 Kelvin, and that's right between daylight and tungsten. And the reason for that is I want to see a little bit of the color of any given light source. Mixed lighting actually is, or can be, quite pretty. So, if you're indoors and you set the white balance to daylight, your tungsten sources are going to be super warm, and vice versa. If you're indoors and you set it to tungsten, the sun's going to be super blue. But if you put it in the middle, they both still hold their color characteristics, which is sort of more film-like. So there's a little tip for you. In regards to using this camera in 2020, honestly, most clients are still shooting 1080. This is a 4K sensor, again, down res to 1080 very elegantly in the camera. It's their top of the line C500 sensor, which was in the C100mkII, I believe. It's a little old, but it's still perfect. This is one of the best 1080 images you'll get, and it comes in a body that gives you a lot of features that DSLRs and mirrorless cameras don't have. It's also EF mount, which is there's millions of EF lenses, and a lot of lenses can be adapted to EF. It's not, an E mount in terms of flexibility, but most professional cameras are either PL or EF. For web, honestly, YouTube uses 4K more than, maybe not commercials, but documentaries or just corporate web stuff or whatever. 1080 is still the vast majority of professional work. And if you're shooting for social media or YouTube or whatever, 1080 is absolutely acceptable. I've used this to shoot vertical content by flipping that up and holding it like that. Shot a whole concert like that. Oh, another thing too, I'll have the autofocus on this lens setup, and it's a really nice autofocus. The interplay between this camera body and the Sigma 18-35 is just nice because the autofocus is kind of human-like. It's slow and it gets things in and out. It's not snappy and artificial. So I have the thumb button here, which is traditionally magnification. I have that set to turn autofocus on and off. So I'll be shooting, I can follow someone with it or get focus and then turn it off and keep moving or whatever. It is only center weighted, which is kind of annoying, but I got over it. Again, use this camera for 5 years. Like I said, in 2020, can you use this camera? Absolutely. Why wouldn't you want to use this camera today? If for whatever reason you needed 4K, okay. Resolution doesn't mean quality. It just means size of image. So what I'll do is, to trick the YouTube algorithm, I will render out a 2K or even 4K render out of Premiere, out of Resolve, and upload that to YouTube to trick YouTube into encoding it at a higher bit rate. And no one's the wiser. Steve Yedlin has done countless tests to show that you really don't, you think you know, but you cannot tell the difference between certain up-resings of footage. It just depends on the up-res algorithm that you're using. 4K capture is definitely useful, but for display, if the sensor's good enough, 1080 is totally fine. You can up-res that to 4K if you want. No one would notice. Oh, super easy to edit too. This isn't going to clog up your computer. You don't have to buy a new computer to edit the footage. This camera's taken a huge beating over the years. You know, it's a little, the corners are a little rubbed off, but it's never failed me once, taking it into the mountains of Colorado, the deserts of Arizona, or Palm Springs. And it's done great. It is 8-bit. So again, you're going to want to make sure your exposure's dead on, but with the owl color picture profile, you'll be in good shape. I'm really happy with how people have responded to that, because it was the right amount of nerdiness to take up my time to like min-max that profile. So that's it. Happy shooting.